Yeah, I just want to share with you a couple of scriptures I was blessed with. I woke up the other morning and two scriptures came to mind. One was no more consciousness of sin, or conscience of sin, and the second was once and for all. Okay, and so I began to read the book of Hebrews, chapter 9 and chapter 10. I just want to start us off in Hebrews chapter 9 and verse 9. Now, Paul has been talking in the previous 8 verses about the tabernacle and all the things that they went through, the sacrifices, the tabernacle itself, and he came to this conclusion. In verse 9 of chapter 9 it says, which was a figure for the time then present, in which were offered both gifts and sacrifices that could not make him that did the service perfect as pertaining to the conscience. So we see for all the actions and all the motions they went through in the Old Testament, all the sacrifices, all the tabernacle, the high priests and everything else, they had a problem. They could not have a clear conscience. The sacrifices that they made could not clear their consciences. And that's what I want to reinforce today, is the sacrifices, you know, really didn't have any effect upon the lives of the people. Now it also says in Hebrews 9:13, for if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer sprinkling the unclean sanctifies to the purifying of the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living God. So here we have a contrast. The Old Testament sacrifices couldn't clear your conscience, right? But Jesus should purge your conscience from dead works to serve the living God. Okay, so we go to Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 1, and this is where I want to drive home the revelation, and hopefully I can convey the idea to you. Okay. Now, Paul comes to the conclusion then, for the law having a shadow of things to come, and not the very image of the things, can never, right, never would those sacrifices which they offered year by year continually make the comers thereunto perfect. So you see the word perfect, right, is always married together with conscience. So we need to have a clear conscience before God. Yeah? And these sacrifices did not accomplish that. They were ineffective. That was why there was a need for a New Testament, a new covenant. Okay? And in Hebrews chapter 10 and verse 2, for then would they not have ceased to be offered? Question mark. Paul concludes here that the sacrifices could not take away sin. For it is not possible that the blood of bulls and goats should take away sin. That's in verse 4. So the Old Testament sacrifices could not, right, effect a clear conscience. Right? So it says, because that the worshippers once purged should have no more conscience of sins. Okay? So I want you to ponder that. Can you see what Paul's saying? If a sacrifice is of any value, and if a sacrifice accomplishes that which is perfect, right, the worshippers should have no more conscience of sins. I'll say that again. If a sacrifice accomplishes the goal of taking away sin, if a sacrifice is truly effective, you should have no more conscience of sin. So we only have two sacrifices. It's a continual sacrifice in the Old Testament, or it's a one sacrifice of Jesus. Okay? By the offering of sacrifice in the Old Testament is proof that they were ineffective. Okay? So let's have a look at Paul's conclusion then. He said, because that the worshippers once purged should have no more conscience of sins. I want to drive this idea home. Right? If the perfect sacrifice had been in the Old Testament, the desired effect would have been, right, they would have no more conscience of sins. For then would they not have ceased to be offered? Question mark. So in other words, if you find the perfect sacrifice, right, that's it, you don't need any more. They would have ceased to have been offered. Okay? And therefore, in Hebrews 10 verse 3, but in those sacrifices there is a remembrance again made of sins every year. So the Old Testament sacrifices were not perfect, ineffective. Okay? Now Hebrews 10 verse 10, right, says, by the which will we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. Okay? By the which will we are sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. That word sanctified means to make holy, to purify, to consecrate, right? To be holy. So you see that Jesus sanctified us, made us holy through his sacrifice. That's what it says in the Greek translation of the word sanctified. Okay? Now, in Hebrews 10 verse 12 it says, but this man, after he had offered one sacrifice for sins forever, sat down on the right hand of God. Okay? Therefore the conclusion is, okay, if Jesus is the perfect sacrifice, then we should have no more conscience of sin. Think about it, that's exactly what Paul said. And how many men preach that today? We should be preaching that. We should be preaching that when Jesus Christ takes away sin, it's forever. Once for all. Hallelujah. So I hope you've been blessed by this. I was blessed when I first looked into it. Okay.